Hello, and welcome back to the Wishing You Well podcast, where we help you navigate your wellness journey each and every week. I'm Amy Albero.
And I'm Catherine Van Eyck. We're both licensed therapists. And this week on Wishing You Well, we are meeting with Meg Fee. Megan is a podcast host for the More Than Sobriety podcast, where she has conversations about alcohol-free living and provides sobriety resources for people in pursuit of a sober lifestyle. We're talking to Meg today about her recovery journey, starting with her decision to stop drinking and what she's learned along the way and how she helps others explore their relationship with alcohol.
So excited for this conversation. Welcome, Meg.
Living and well life to put together. Authentic.
We feel it.
Take care of ourselves. Welcome, Meg. We are so happy and excited to have you here today. And we have a bunch of things that we want to learn more about from you. But before we do that, before we dive into our episode, Catherine and I always love to start at the top of every episode, really just checking in with one another and how we're doing. I'm checking in about self-care. It gives us an opportunity to really reset and adjust if needed. So I wanted to invite you to, let us know how you are, what your self-care looks like these days.
Yeah. And thank you for having me. I'm really excited to meet you both. Self-care for me lately, I know it may sound silly to some people, but I've been in disordered eating recovery for like a decade now. And I only went back to therapy for it recently. And with that, I've really been focusing on just kind of like nourishing my body 3 times a day and like feeding myself enough. So it might sound silly to some people, but self-care for me lately, it looks like 3 full meals and easy movement. That's another thing I've been working on with my therapist, is just like not forcing myself to necessarily get on my Peloton or run a few miles, but just move in the way that I feel like comfortable with that day. So even if that means like, I work from home, so it's kind of sometimes hard to get out between meetings. But if that even is just a walk at Target after work, like that's good enough for me. So yeah, just kind of gentle movement and nourishing my body, I would say, kind of covers self-care for me lately.
I love that. It does not sound silly at all. Of course, like taking care of like our most basic and foundational needs is so important. And also like reestablishing that connection to yourself, like that more intuitive, gentle movement is so key.
Yeah, exactly. And also on that topic of working from home, like it can be tough to disconnect when your job is at home. So that's, I would say, the third thing is just kind of disconnecting from work, because just because I'm at home and my laptop's in front of me doesn't mean I need to keep working until 9:00 at night. So that's another one. Setting those boundaries with work is another kind of self-care component lately.
Yeah, I mean, what both of those have in common is just that you're being really intentional. And that's what we always talk about when we talk about self-care, is how important it is to really get in touch with what you need, not just doing something because you think it represents self-care and it sounds like so nice. Like you're really doing something that's beneficial to you and something that is going to be really, really helpful and something that you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like fancy face masks and bubble baths and getting my nails done, like that's all fun and great as well. But I think like getting the basics down is important. So that's what you kind of reminded me of just now.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Amy?
Well, you caught me off guard there. I usually ask.
I know. I jumped in. I knew you were going to ask me first.
Let's see. I have been traveling a bunch. I feel like I said this on a more recent episode, like my body hasn't been in the same place for the same time for a long time. And so this is my first weekend home in about a month, or maybe even a little over a month. And as there's like a part of me that like really wants to just like stay home and remain grounded. And I'm like met with the reality that I have a lot of social things this weekend as well. And so like self-care for me, I guess, go into this weekend is is finding that balance of spending time with my friends who I haven't seen in so long, especially some of them for quite a while. So like really trying to like soak that up, but also like finding a stopping time to those social interactions that also works for me too. So I can like go to the grocery store and like clean my kitchen and all of those things that I like really, really also need to do, or just like sit on the couch. So my self-care goal is, I think, to find some balance between me time and also social time. And so like I'm trying to bring some intentionality to that as I go into my weekend. I'm a people pleaser, like maybe a people pleaser in my own sort of recovery. And so this is like a really tough one for me. And so that's really what I'm working on, is finding a boundary that works.
Yeah, travel can be really tough. I'm finding as I get like further into my 30s, and I guess as I get more sober, I'm like, I need a lot more time to recover from travel. And I always like, I'll look at my calendar, like, you know, I'm looking at my August and September calendars now, and I'm like, I need weekends that are just open with nothing so that I can do exactly like you're saying, like just chill at home, clean, vacuum, like just to have some alone time, because a lot of travel can be really like overstimulating and draining. So I feel you on that.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. How about you, Catherine? How are you? How's your self-care?
So it's kind of funny because I'm thinking like the opposite right now. I typically will go like a few weeks feeling like, all right, I've nourished myself. I feel like I've had enough time to myself. And now like I'm craving that social time and I really need it. I think recently I've had a lot more of that, and without really realizing what I'm doing. And it's almost like I have to get it in while I can, because come end of September, when I have a baby, then it's going to look a lot different. It's going to be a lot harder to get together, at least for a while, when I'm figuring all that out. So I think I'm just trying to like, yeah, I guess like keep checking this off and checking it off to like, I can get like extra fulfilled by it until I can't anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations. That's so exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, super exciting. And also like, obviously very life-changing. So going to try to do the things that I like while my life is the way that it is for the next few weeks. So I do have plans tonight with a friend and plans tomorrow with a different group of friends. That's enough for the weekend, but that's a lot already for me anyway. So
that makes sense. It makes sense that you're kind of preparing to cocoon and go inward. Mm-hmm. Now you want some of that action before that.
Yeah. Well, I know, we're talking about self-care, and self-care is one part of wellness or well-being. And so, we wanted to ask you, this being kind of a wellness focused podcast, what wellness or well-being, living a well life looks like for you, Meg.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about that question. I saw it kind of in our emails, and it's a big one, but I think because, life is going to be life no matter what. There's always going to be ups and downs. But I think over the last 3 years of reevaluating my relationship with substances and alcohol, I have redefined what wellness means for me. Kind of going back to what we were saying before about, face masks and bubble baths and exercise, like fancy exercise classes and stuff like that. Before I quit drinking, 3-4 years ago, I thought that I was very into wellness and health, while not even paying attention to what I was consuming from an alcohol standpoint, like kind of intentionally not paying attention to that and just sweeping it under the rug. And now that I've removed that from my life, I think the biggest impact it's had on me is my mental health. Like beforehand, it was all physical that I was really caring about. And I was kind of overcompensating. I felt like crap because I was drinking a lot, going out a lot, not really taking care of my body. When I was drinking or hungover, I would eat, what you eat when you're really drunk or when you're hungover. It's not usually, health foods. And then I would overcompensate and go like a week where I was like detoxing or working out every single day to like work off or make up for the previous weekend. And after quitting drinking, now that I don't have to overcompensate so much, and now that my body and my mind has really adjusted to this sobriety, I'm realizing like what it means for me to be well is just to not have the level of anxiety and depression that I had before. And I have it. Like I still battle depression. I still have anxiety. A lot of us do, but being able to remove alcohol really showed me how much I thought alcohol was helping me regulate those emotions like sadness and grief and anxiety. Like I said, work stress. I would drink to cope with all of those different emotions. And now that I don't do that, and now that I can handle my emotions myself, like internally, and I don't have all of these crazy hormones going all over the place and all of that happening, I think wellness for me is just like my current mental state is what it means to be well, compared to where I was at a few years ago. And I think if you had asked me that question a few years ago, it would have been kind of a superficial response about like going to yoga a few times a week and like what I would eat. And now I'm realizing like, yeah, for me, most important thing is just to be mentally and emotionally stable, and removing alcohol from my life is like the only thing that got me there. So long way of saying, I think, yeah, feeling mentally at ease is wellness for me. Hopefully that made sense. I think I rambled a little bit.
No, it totally did. And a common answer we get in so many different unique ways is this idea of balance. And I feel like you said that in terms of like stability, like you need that stability with your mind and your body to feel well, but in your own way. And so like, of course, we want this question to be not like, what should wellness be for everybody? Like, no, like, is it to you? And this is what it is to you. And it's different now than it was. And of course it's different now. I mean, it sounds like, well, what we already know about you, but like what we're going to learn about you and what our listeners will learn about you is how much you've changed over the last, few years.
Yeah, definitely that stability and ability to regulate my own emotions, I think is like, if I had to break it down into like a short synopsis, that's what it would be. Because beforehand, my emotions were all over the place. Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely that stability and balance is what it's all about for me.
Well, something that you've alluded to and that in our intro, Catherine shared about is, and what you're here to talk to us about today is, living sober. And so can you tell us a little bit about your journey and your experience and kind of what brought you to this decision and here today?
Yeah. I'll definitely feel free, guys, to like cut me off or interrupt with a question if I'm rambling, but I think to go back, not to go all the way back to like the womb or high school, I started out drinking just like a normal, like a lot of us do. We start drinking in our kind of like adolescent years, toying with it, college years, early 20s. A lot of us kind of look the same at that point. But I think I always struggled to control myself around alcohol in a way that started to stand out at some point in my 20s. And I would say I had always been a blackout drinker, and I always thought it was normal. Like, I just thought that's what happens when you're young and you drink too much. And like, everybody's doing it. Everybody's binge drinking in college, taking shots, all of that. Like, especially if you go to a big party school, just a lot of people a lot of people drink that way, heavily, and kind of with like the goal of getting like kind of messy. And I did like enjoy it at that time. I never really questioned the blackouts. When I started questioning my drinking, I was, after graduating from undergrad, moved back to New York, where I'm from, and moved into the city, started working, living on my own, working in advertising, had a great job. Alcohol never really impacted my performance, like in school or at work or otherwise. Never really damaged any of my relationships in any big way. There were always some embarrassing moments on dates and stuff like that. But I think in my 20s, I would say somewhere between like 23 and 25 is when I probably started questioning, like a little voice in the back of my head is like, is this normal? And like that age old, like, am I an alcoholic? Which I'll get to it and we can talk about it at another point, but like not the right question to be asking yourself most of the time. But I think it just started coming to mind because things would get messier and messier. I ended up in the hospital a couple of times and surprisingly like brushed it off, like as like just like a crazy drunken night with coworkers. But looking back, it's like horrifying. But again, I think because I wasn't someone who had ever gotten a DUI, never got kicked out of it anywhere, never got into any huge fights. I didn't have those like classic check boxes that you think of in your head when you're like, oh, this is somebody who has a problem with alcohol. I wasn't like in that box. I was still overperforming at work, like getting raises, promotions. But I think the more time went by, I kept putting myself in dangerous situations and the blackouts just kept getting worse. So yeah, somewhere in my mid-20s, just kind of, I would say probably started to try and cut back or like moderate myself. You hear, if you're somebody who's, if anybody's listening and you're in like the sobriety space and you're trying, you're sober curious and you follow sobriety blogs, you might hear of this term moderation. And basically what it is like, it's pretty common. I think a lot of people do it, but like it started out as like, oh, I'm only going to drink on Thursdays and Fridays, or like, I'm only going to drink Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or I'm only going to drink ciders, or I'm only going to drink, or I can't drink tequila, so I'm going to stay away from tequila, or I can only drink wine, or I'm going to drink water between every drink. Like all of these different like strategies that I was trying to put in place to prevent myself from getting too drunk, from blacking out, from saying stupid things, doing stupid things, like putting myself at risk physically. None of it worked. And I spent like several years in my 20s trying to control alcohol. And I say that with like little air quotes, because sometimes you're just somebody who can't, like, it's controlling a toxic substance. Like alcohol isn't meant to be controlled. So if you're someone who like finds yourself trying to control it, like maybe rethink it as like, it's not something that you should be trying to control in the first place. It might just not be suited for you. But yeah, so I guess like not to get too off track, but I'm kind of like going through my 20s here, well, but
can I ask you about, you said you had asked yourself the wrong question at a time. And am I an alcoholic? And
yeah.
You're saying that was the wrong question. Like what would have been the right question at that time?
Yeah, I think the right questions, or some different questions, would have been, because I'll even say like, I did the classic, like Googling, like, what are the traits of an alcoholic? I reached out to my friends and I'm like, do you think I have a problem with alcohol? Do you think I could be an alcoholic? And of course the answer was no. And of course, when I was looking up those websites that described like severe alcoholism, I'd be like, no, like I don't do that. I don't drink every single day. I don't wake up in the morning and drink alcohol. Like, and you kind of just rationalize. And I was like, no, that's not me. Like, I'm good. I'm safe. But I think instead it's like, is alcohol serving you? Is alcohol making you happy? Is alcohol putting you in danger? Is it making you feel like shit. Like the questions don't need to be that complicated. I think we've just been conditioned to complicate the questions. And like, again, I can go on a tangent, but like big alcohol can't be underestimated. Like we see marketing I work in marketing. I started my career in alcohol marketing, actually, which probably didn't serve me very well in those early 20s, but we see it all around us, and we're conditioned to think that like, if we have a problem with alcohol, we are the problem, not alcohol. Like that's why the commercials say drink responsibly. Like they're putting the ownership on you to use this drug responsibly. And like no other drug does that. Like we don't do that with any other drug. And people are even like unwilling to call alcohol a drug still. Like I've seen that a lot over the last few years, because it's like it's so socially accepted that it's like, ooh, that's a little too far. Like it's not a drug. Like you just see that all the time. So I think, yeah, is it serving me? Could I be happier without it? Or like, what would life even look like without it? And that can be a scary one, but those questions I think would have served me a bit better. And to get to like the positive end of my story, you know, I think alcohol quickly became, I quickly became somebody who was drinking almost daily, like at the end, my journey with alcohol. And I would say that was around like 2019 and 2020. I think 2020, like many other people experienced, my drinking habits like rapidly accelerated. And they were already like, I was drinking probably 4 out of 7 days a week. It'd be like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, maybe on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday, I'd have a couple glasses of wine. But I think the pandemic, like I was, just to paint a picture, like living in New York City, working from home, as a lot of people were, but he was my boyfriend at the time. He's now my husband, but we were living in like a less than 500 square foot apartment in New York with like bars on the windows, like no outside space. And so I was drinking a lot, like at the beginning of the pandemic, but already questioning it in my mind, because I had a few situations in 2019 where it just wasn't good. Like just drank way too much. I'll call them like some episodes. And so I had a couple episodes in 2019 that really scared me, scared my husband. And then 2020, I was trying to stop. I go back in my camera roll and I see all of these posts that I would like screenshot about sobriety. And I could just remember my mind was like questioning it more. And then, like I said, pandemic happened, drank a lot. The streets of New York looked like a carnival at one point. Like everybody was drinking outside. Like there was no open container laws anymore. Like it was a party in the streets for those first few months. Everybody was doing like to-go margaritas, and it was just like madness. And so I really leaned into that. But then I think drinking more and more at that time and being confined to that small space with my boyfriend at the time shined a light on like how bad my drinking really was getting. And I couldn't really hide it anymore, or like where I would normally, again, in 2019, when it was really accelerating, I would like maybe have a bottle of wine to myself and then go get another one and pretend like I didn't have one. Like I would try and hide it from my significant other, because I was already working from home before the pandemic. So like if I would pop open a bottle of wine at like 4 p.m. on a Wednesday, drink my bottle, and then like I knew when my boyfriend was coming home and like have another bottle when he got home and act like it was my first one. Mm-hmm. So like you can see how from the beginning of my 20s till the end, alcoholism is now defined on a spectrum of like alcohol use disorder, and it's moderate to severe. And I would say like towards the end of my drinking probably was on the severe end, but it didn't start out that way. So I guess to be honest, my boyfriend gave me like kind of an ultimatum. I had another one of my like drinking episodes, woke up from a blackout, and he was kind of just like expressing that he was really concerned and wanted to talk to my friends and my family about it. And I like could not allow that to happen because again, like drinking never impacted my relationships or performance at work or any of that. And I didn't want to be seen as an alcoholic. So that kind of gave me the kick and the push to seek out sobriety and really give it a shot. And so the summer of 2020 is when I first started kind of like really committing to explore my sober curiosity and change. I think I did like a 42-day challenge that summer. And from there, in a sense, I can say like never looked back. There have been some slips along the way. I haven't been consistently sober since that summer, but I would say since that summer, I would say, you know, some people don't really relate to this, but like I would say I've been recovering from like alcohol misuse since that summer. And recovery is kind of like there are ups and downs. So I'll be a year alcohol free in September, at the end of September. But yeah, there have been highs and lows, but overall, I think again, like because of that summer where I did a long period of time alcohol free completely, I immediately saw that my life, my mental state, everything was so much better without it, that once I kind of like tried to go back and drink again, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that like alcohol was the issue in my life and like it had to be removed. So a lot has changed since then, but I'll stop rambling for a second and let you guys respond.
Well, I mean, so you got this ultimatum and you got on this track. Like, how did you do it? How did you really like, what did you put in place to make this possible for you?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing is like, you have to want to change. Like that's definitely something that I realized, like looking back, is like there were several times even after that summer that I was like, like still kind of hanging on to this identity of like being a drinker and like what, like future tripping about like what would I be like as a wife, or like how would my wedding be or my honeymoon like without alcohol, like all of these things that I was still holding on to. But I think first and foremost, like there was some part of me that wanted to change and like so desperately wanted to feel better. So I think like acceptance is like kind of what I'm getting at here, is like I accepted that maybe I do have a problem with alcohol. Maybe alcohol is a problem for me, to word it better. Maybe it's not. Maybe it doesn't fit into my life. Maybe I need to stop trying to fit it into my life. 2 is like finally admitting and leaning on somebody, because there had been so many times where like my significant other confronted me or like we talked about it and I was just kind of avoiding like taking accountability and not accepting his help. So I think like talking to somebody about it, whether it's your significant other or a friend, but like you have to know who to talk to about it. Because again, I had asked friends, do you think I have a problem? And of course, those are my drinking friends. Like, of course, they're going to say no, like they drink in a similar way. So somebody that you know will support you, confide in them is what I did. And then like tangible things, like I removed all the alcohol from our apartment, like, you know, not that we were like had a stockpile, but like wine bottles, beer, you know, my husband had like scotch, stuff like that, just like out of sight, out of mind, kind of can come into play. So removed it. And I did a challenge. So at the time, the community, it was kind of like support community I found online. There's way more now than there were 3 years ago, but I did 1,000 Hours Dry. You can still find their page on Instagram, but they aren't as active as a community as they were then. They would do like 4 to 5 challenges throughout the year, 42 days, which I think is like 6 weeks. And they would encourage followers and anybody participating to like get involved. They would have prompts every day. I downloaded an app At the time, it's now called Reframe app. It was called something different at the time, but I downloaded Reframe and they had an integration with 1000 Hours Dry where like you could track, you would learn about alcohol and how it impacts your body for those 42 days and like what would be changing or like healing in your body as you got further away from using alcohol. And like journaling prompts would be inside the app. So I did that. Then I became more of an active member in the community. Like I was actually hosting the Instagram page and encouraging other people like the next time I did the challenge, which was like the fall after that. So, and you don't have to, for someone listening, like, again, there's so many other communities and programs and apps now. And I can like share a whole bunch of recommendations, but all that to say, like you can find community and support in so many different places, but that was critical for me. And then listening to podcasts. And that's kind of why I started my own podcast, because at first, and even still today, like if I go on my walk, I'll listen to recovery, sobriety related podcasts, but listening to those podcasts, there's a bunch. If you just like open Spotify or Apple Podcasts and type in recovery or sobriety, like you'll find a bunch, and just listening to other people tell their stories was really, really helpful because it helped me identify my own story in theirs and realize, okay, I don't have to be this check box picture of what people think an alcoholic looks and acts like to benefit from removing alcohol from my life. Like, and I think just hearing other people talk about it, because I didn't have any friends or family members who were sober from alcohol and talking about it. So that was my only like example to look at. So yeah, community podcasts. There's so many sobriety books that I had read at first. I haven't read one in a while, but I read a few that first year, and those were really helpful. Quit Like a Woman by Holly Whitaker is amazing. And that her book definitely changed my life. So I just really, to be honest, tried everything. Like anything I could consume about this topic, I was consuming that first year for sure. And then never really left the community aspect of things. So I'm always kind of, I try different meeting groups. I tried a couple AA meetings. They weren't really for me. They were helpful for like the purpose that they served, but I just have found people that I relate more to in other communities. But that's been like probably the biggest pillar, is just making friends, honestly. Yeah, I'm sure there's more, but that's.
And one thing that I was hearing as you were talking about your story at the beginning, and thank you so much for sharing and being like so generous with what you're sharing with us and our listeners, is that it sounds like on some level you like battled with a little bit of shamefulness around maybe like dealing with this, or like quote unquote, like not being able to drink responsibly or trying to control a substance that's like not meant to be controlled, that like can create a lot of shame, which then of course, as we know, and we on this podcast talk about a lot in terms of shame, it's not a motivator. It makes us feel worse. It often reinforces behavior and all of that stuff. And the way to kind of eradicate shame or to heal through shame is through kind of sharing our stories, being in community. And so I can understand how like finding community and listening to podcasts, books, being part of online communities was so helpful and healing to you to understand that you weren't the only one that was navigating through something like this. And like you could see yourself in others, and others could potentially see themselves in you. Like that sounds like I can understand how that was such a big part of your journey. And I guess along with that, sorry, this is like a long way to get to a question, but one thing I also heard you say that I've noticed for myself is that it seems like more and more of these communities are popping up, or just maybe it says something about me and where I am in my sober curiosity journey, but I'm seeing more and more accounts being dedicated to sober living or sobriety, or like, have you noticed that? What do you think that's about?
Yeah, no, it is. And it's really cool. It gets me really excited. I would say most of the people that follow me, like if you just look through my followers, most of them are like sober accounts, or just accounts made for someone to log their experience quitting drinking. And I love it. I think, while I'd like to think that I was on the forefront of this like sober curious movement, I honestly think, it happened. I think it happened a couple years or a few years before that, like this internet, like digital boom. But 2020 to now, yes, like massive, massive boom. Not only in like sober Instagram, which is funny to say, but like not only that, but also the alcohol-free industry, like that. And I'm not going to even try to, but like I'll butcher the data on it. But if you look up, like the non-alcoholic industry is booming right now. And I've definitely noticed it just anecdotally, like from my own view. I mean, when I first started quitting drinking, I think there was like Athletic Brewing Co. and like Kin Euphorics were the first two I tried. But then all of a sudden, all of these other brands started popping up, and new ones pop up every single day, it seems. And the like projected, I don't know, the category is projected in like the multi-billions now in the next like 10 years or something. If you look it up, there's all these really exciting articles about that category. But yes, like that, the amount of communities and programs and resources there are now has like completely, quadrupled. Like it's massive. However, I feel like it's still like, because I'm so in it, and because I'm in it every single day, I'm sort of surprised when I like leave this bubble and talk to a group of friends that like nobody even thinks about sober curiosity or like the alcohol-free products industry. Like still a lot of people don't know about it. And I also have to remind myself that I'm in New York, and like we're on the fort, like we are spoiled with like so every big city is going to be spoiled with the options that we have. And like, there's a huge chunk of people, there's a huge chunk of our country who's like not near a major city and probably still struggles to find resources and doesn't know that. So while yes, it has, I think there's still so much room to grow. And I also read an article recently that like, even though the non-alcoholic industry is growing, the alcohol industry hasn't stopped. It's also continuing to grow like at a consistent rate. So it's kind of telling, where I think if you're someone seeking it out, yes, you're going to find more resources, but like, I don't know about just like your like, is it in everybody else's faces? I don't know. Like, I think you have to really still be looking for it. I don't know if that made any sense, but yeah, I think it is definitely a trend now. And like, you see like mocktail videos and like all of this, and like, it's definitely a health trend, I think.
Why do you think somebody might still be hesitant to hop on it as a trend or hop on it as a new way, a lifestyle for themselves? Like what could be keeping somebody from even getting curious with sober curiosity?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think in a way it's still, there's still so much stigma, right? So it still implies by expressing, oh, maybe I don't want to drink tonight. Like even if it's just for a night, or you go out to dinner and it's like most of your friends drink or most of your family drinks, and you don't order a glass of wine or whatever your norm is. Expressing that is still going to like raise some eyebrows, and people may still or likely will question you on it or press you on it still. And I think it comes with an implication that like something's wrong, like, or you're pregnant. Like that's one as a woman I get all the time. Like at first, not anymore, but at first, like I was shocked at how many like people I'm not even close to would be like, oh, like, do you have some news? And I'm like, that happened at a wedding once. And I was like, no, it was like my husband's friend that I had never met before. And I was like, no, like, that's so uncomfortable to ask. So I think like my point is just, it comes with implications for a lot of people. Like, it comes with questions. And I've seen it firsthand, like over and over and over again. It's so annoying and uncomfortable to have to face those questions over and over and over again. And yeah, I think a lot of people will assume like, oh, do they have a problem? Like, or what happened? Or yeah, they'll just ask why or question you. So that could be a big reason. And then I think if you're someone, you may be like, I was for a very long time, like maybe resisting the reality that you may need to take a look at this. Like, that's definitely, you know, like I said, in 2019, I kind of knew, 2018 even, I kind of knew something was off already, but I just like didn't want to look under the rug. Like, it's a lot of work to address this, just like it is with anything, like anxiety, depression, eating disorders, like anything that you're going through mentally or physically, like any sort of recovery or healing journey is a lot of work. And so I think people want to sort of avoid it. Like, a lot of people might just not be ready to face it. And yeah, and then there's another thing that comes to mind is just like this feeling like an outcast, kind of, even within your own family, like not being able to celebrate in the same ways that you used to. Like, depending on what family you come from, how you were raised, like alcohol could be very, very ingrained in family traditions and your culture, and like how you bond with your friends even, and your family. And so I think there's kind of, for a lot of people, like this grieving that comes with it, or like, who am I without this? Like, for me, it was definitely part of my identity, like being a drinker for a long time. And so there's just so many reasons why it's hard to take a look at. But if I always say, like, if you have an inkling, like even a little tiny gut feeling, like, do not ignore it. Like, that's all the sign you need. Like, you don't need to ask anybody. You don't need to ask Google. Like, and you don't even need to relate to my whole story. Like, you don't even need to get as bad as I did. You don't need to get bad at all. Like, if you just have a feeling that you might be better off without it, like, it is so worth it to do the work and remove it and get past those uncomfortable assumptions and questions and moments, and you'll figure it out and you'll be thankful afterwards.
What would you say has made it worth it for you? Like, what have you learned and what have you gotten from this?
Yeah, I think my self-worth is like number one. There were so many moments where alcohol just like completely disconnected me from myself. Like, not to sound like too like spiritual, but like I like did not know who I was. Completely lost at one point. Like, the longer I drank, the more years I spent drinking, the further I got away from myself and what I actually liked to do, and the people that I actually liked to spend time with, and the places I liked to go. Like, I was super lost. Like, drinking was my only hobby, and like, I just didn't really know who I was. So I think what made it worth it was kind of like coming home to myself in a way where now I know who I am. I'm not making, like, I made a lot of decisions and said a lot of things that weren't me. Like, when I drank, I felt like I became a different person. And like, people around me, like my family, my friends, my husband would say the same thing. Like, you turned into a different Meg. Like, that wasn't like who I know. Like, I don't, I would just be a different person. And I was really angry, argumentative, combative. I just was not myself. And yeah, removing alcohol, I think all that work, I'm like, I've never felt more myself. I've found myself like getting back to things, like, it may sound silly, but like as a kid, I was like a singer and a dancer, and like, I didn't do that. Like, I kind of lost touch with that, because if you don't study like musical theater, you kind of like get away from it. Like, what are you going to do in your adulthood? But like, I know this sounds so cheesy, but I wrote this down a while ago, and I said, like, I'm waking up with songs in my head again. Like, I know that sounds so cheesy, but like I used to have a song in my head all the time as a little girl, like, and somewhere between college and in my 20s, like it just went away. And now it's like, I have that joy back. Like I can listen to music again and like feel the way I did when I was little. That might seem dramatic, but it's like the best way to describe it. And yeah, I think that, and like my confidence too, like I don't care what anybody else, that's another thing. Like the confidence is built as you stick to your goals. So like I was very shaky and not confident in myself at the beginning of sobriety. And it can be awkward and feel weird. And like, I'm bringing my own seltzer to like family barbecues and like, you know, whatever, like ordering a non-alcoholic beer. And like, you're wondering what people are going to think of you and what if someone's going to say something, and, or like ordering a mocktail and thinking that the bartender's going to like look at you weird or whatever, like just questioning if people will judge. But my confidence has grown the further along I've gotten in sobriety. And like, I've never given less fucks. Sorry if I can't like curse, but I've never cared less about like what anybody thinks about my lifestyle, because it's like, this is my life. So I don't really like care what anybody else thinks. And so confidence is another one. And just that mental clarity. Like I said, anxiety and depression is something I battle, but a whole nother conversation, like using medication, like I'm on an SSRI, I'm open about that, but nobody ever told me like, you probably shouldn't drink when you're taking an SSRI. So that was another benefit of seeing, like, it's not like, oh, I stopped drinking and my anxiety and depression like disappeared, but it's like, now I can address it. Like now I can actually work on it. I would never have been able to work on that if I didn't remove alcohol from the equation. And that goes for like a whole bunch of other things too. Yeah, those are the big ones.
I was just going to say, it sounds like the word that was like kind of ringing in my mind as you were talking was like how liberating it must feel, like to feel like yourself, to have this confidence, to feel more connected to yourself, like that. It just sounds so freeing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And like I said, like life is going to life, like things are going to happen. Work is work. Like I still have a full-time job that like stresses the hell out of me sometimes. And like shit happens, but I can deal with things so much better now. Like, yeah. And that is liberating to kind of have that. Like, I don't need to reach for something external to get past my stress or even like grieving. Like I have lost quite a few people in my life, and like always the way I dealt with it was drinking. And like, I know that like I can get through anything now without having to reach for something else to like numb myself, really is what it is.
Yeah. And I mean, that just like goes back to what you were saying before, even with like taking an SSRI and now seeing how you can actually do the work and like put in the effort to essentially help yourself without alcohol. And in the same way with grieving, that like you weren't actually grieving at those times. And now you actually feel like you can do that. And that's where it seems like a lot of people may struggle with the idea of living a sober, curious lifestyle, that like they feel like they're giving up something that is working for them, that like they're tied to this thing that is helping them to an extent, but it's helping them from it, or sorry, rather it's keeping them from helping themselves, because helping yourself is really, really difficult. It's really, really challenging to put in the work, like you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think at first I think back to, so I said like, I'm 300 something days now, but in 2021, I went almost the full year alcohol free before slipping. But that year, so that like first year that I spent almost the whole year sober, was really hard emotionally because of exactly what you're saying. I did not know how to deal with anything on my own, like anything at all. again, like anytime I was dealing with stress, I would go directly for wine. Anytime I was dealing with anger, I had a lot of anger. Like I said before, like I would go directly for wine. And like when I removed it and I committed to not using that to numb myself through it, I realized like, oh shit, I don't know how to deal with my emotions as an adult. Like I've never done this before. And it was rough. Like I look back at like photos from that time and I'm like, I was struggling some of those months. So for anyone listening who's like, oh, I'm 6 months, or I'm 7 months, or I'm 8 months, and I can't like do this. Like, I don't think this is working, or I don't feel this like magical, like ease. Like it's not going to be easy at first for a lot of us. Maybe for some it will. Like everybody's different, but if you're anything like me, like it takes a bit to recalibrate and like figure this out. It's not this like magic thing. Like I said, it's not like all your issues are solved, but like you said, Catherine, like makes you more equipped to handle those things and do the work. And then once you know how to do it, it gets easier.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, Meg, you mentioned in 2021, you had a slip, which I imagine is like something to expect as part of like the recovery process. Can you share a little bit about how that you were able to kind of like navigate through that slip and kind of push forward to where you are now?
Yeah. So the timing is important too. Like the context of it is key because like I said, summer of 2020 is when I first started like doing stints of sobriety. I would go like 2 months and then I would slip, and then I would do another 2 or 3 months and then I would slip. And in October of 2020, towards the end of the year, we got engaged. And that was, as a lot of us women know, like when you get engaged, champagne is flowing, like everybody wants to give you a bottle, like you go out to dinner, they want to give you a free drink. Like it's a hard time for somebody who's like in early sober curiosity, early sobriety. So that was the first time where I was like, kind of slipped back into drinking at the end of the year through all those celebrations and like the holiday season through like October and December. And then in January of 2021, I was like, okay, I'm recommitting. I'm going to commit to a year, this year leading up to our wedding. I want to be clear-headed. I want to be sober. I know I'm better sober. And so that year was the one that I committed to going alcohol-free. And I went from, I want to say like, it was like February something all the way until February, all the way until the following January, something like that. And so when I slipped, I was like 10 months. I was around 10 months. And that whole entire year leading up to my wedding, we had a wedding date for early 2022. And it was a big wedding around COVID has its own like stress. It was just like a very stressful year. And I got through so many challenging moments that year without drinking. And it was like, I felt great. Like I felt really good at the end of that year, like at that 9-10 month mark. I did my bridal shower alcohol-free. And in January 2022 was my bachelorette party. And like I said, like some of that, there were highs and lows that year. I think like 7-8 months, I was like pretty low. Like I said before, it was like all those emotions. I didn't know how to feel them. And so my point is I got through a lot of stressful moments in those 10 months. And it was a really stressful year. And my bachelorette party I kept it intentionally small. Like my wedding was huge. My wedding party was huge. Like I had so many bridesmaids, like huge family. So it was like cousins, sisters. But I intentionally planned my bachelorette party, or had my maid of honor plan my bachelorette party around my sobriety. So I had no intentions of drinking. We did like a small, like only an intimate thing with my close friends, like not even my whole bridal party. It was the winter. So we just did like a little like staycation house. We had like yoga. We had like a hot tub. It wasn't like it wasn't like a rowdy bachelorette party. My maid of honors brought like all of these alcohol-free drinks, like really planned it like very intentionally around my sobriety. But I was having so many questions in my mind about celebrating at my wedding without drinking. Like, even though I had gone those, like that, almost that whole year, I still was like having trouble envisioning my wedding without a glass of champagne, or just without the ability to drink whatever I wanted at my wedding. For some reason, that was like such a sticking point for me. But at that bachelorette, I really thought through it. I let my, they asked, so that's why I'm saying I like allowed them to. I let my friends bring a few bottles of wine. And that's always like the tricky one for me. It's always wine that I want. I really like glamorized that when I drank. So I just ended up drinking wine. Like, I made a intentional decision, like, to drink. That's why it's hard to even call it a slip, because I decided, like, I thought through it. I talked to my, two of my bridesmaids about it. I talked to my husband, my fiance, about it. And I rationalized it in my head, because I was like, I don't want my wedding day to be the first day that I try drinking again after 10 months. And so I did choose to drink, but it immediately went south, like the way that it always goes. I blacked out, couldn't stop at the limit that I set for myself, woke up so sick the next day and was miserable. I was like, tears. It was like a whole mess the day after I drank. And I can laugh about it now, but it was just, I'm now looking back, I'm really, really thankful that I did choose to do that there in that setting where I felt really safe, and like it was a contained setting instead of my wedding, because then I went on and did not drink for my wedding and had like the best time. And now I can say, like, I stayed sober for my wedding. I'm so proud of that. But yeah, it was a rough slip. I immediately restarted the next day. Like, I didn't drink again. You asked, like, how did I get through that? Again, like my community, like I'm in a group, a local group, Sober IRL. It's called Long Island. And it's just like filled with local girls from this area, and immediately messaged them the next day and just like cried it out and like gave myself a lot of grace, and just got back up again and like had to keep going and like keep looking ahead. So that's kind of the story of that big slip. There had been other slips after that. But I think, like, for me, it's always just starting again. Like, you make a mistake, you learn a lesson, and you start again. Like, in that situation, like I said, every situation is different. In that situation, it was all about my wedding. It was all about this belief that I like had to drink at my wedding. Like, I don't know why that was like so ingrained in me, but like, that's what got me to that one. And it was like the idea of celebrating. It was like celebration was a big component for me, because I had gotten through so many hard times without drinking that whole year. So I was like harping on at the beginning where like the whole year was really stressful and I didn't drink for any of that. But then when I was happy and like felt really good and stable, I was like, why do I want to drink so badly? And it was just like, I hadn't been in a situation where I was celebrating and being celebrated and like realizing, oh no, I don't have to drink just because this is like a big party and just because I feel good. Like, why is that my automatic like go-to that I should drink because I'm being celebrated? So that was like the lesson for me there. And then the wedding is how I proved like, okay, no, I can feel really good and like have this amazing celebration without drinking. And I did, and it was great. And didn't drink on the honeymoon. Like, it was all, I disproved like exactly what I thought I needed to do when I slipped. So I think just anybody listening who's going through a slip or like will go through a slip again, it's just like, start again. Like, if you feel like shit after your slip, there's your reminder that like, don't just drink again. Like, you felt better before. So I think we just need to normalize like making mistakes. We're human. Mm-hmm. It's a learning process. I always think like I spent a decade more drinking. So it's going to take a while to like unravel all of those thoughts and beliefs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's so helpful and such a good reminder. Like, it's not going to be linear, like completely linear. Like, that's just not how any sort of like healing happens. And I think that is such a validating and normalizing reminder that like it may happen. It's okay. Learn what you can from it and move forward. Like that's just like a beautiful life lesson too.
Yeah. And one thing you said was that you said this throughout, but that you turned towards your community when you needed them the most. That podcasts were a huge resource for you too, and like building this community. And now you have your own podcast where I imagine that was your intention to do the same thing, that you wanted to kind of embrace this community and build upon it with your Instagram account as well. Can you speak to those two things?
Yeah, definitely. I think in the back of my mind since 2020 always wanted to, I write a lot. Like I've always kind of been, I struggle to like say I'm a writer because I'm not, but like I studied journalism. I've always loved writing, wanted to be a writer at one point. And now I work in like the creative marketing space. And so I think creativity and writing is an outlet for me. So my Instagram page, You Don't Have to Drink, started as like a journal. So if you go like all the way back, you don't have to do that. But like if you do, it's, first of all, I had like three or four different names for the page at first. I was always like changing the name of it, but it was a journal, truly like more of a diary of like my ups and downs, and like you'll see me slip and like get back up again and slip and get back up again. But it just kept growing, and it just turned into a true like creative outlet for me where I can just share about my experience, normalize those slips, share about the overlap of like disordered eating recovery and recovery from alcohol. And it's another form of connection for me. I've been connected with so many awesome people, programs, resources. You guys, we connected through Instagram. Like it's just such a cool, there's a lot of cons about social media. Like sometimes I need a break. But there's also a lot of pros if you use it the right way. So, or like use it with boundaries, I guess. And so I love the space there. And I love when something resonates with people and it feels to me like I'm giving back in the same way that I needed to take when I was like earlier on. And the podcast is the same exact thing. I always had it in my mind that I wanted to make something else. Like I didn't know what it was going to be. I've thought about like longer form writing, but once I started being invited on some podcasts and really enjoyed that experience of like meeting people, it's face to face, but like over Zoom, meeting people and adding more nuance to these discussions that like only a little tiny square can't cover on Instagram. That's what I really like about it. And again, like giving back in the same way that I needed when I was like in my kitchen cooking dinner year one, like having a meltdown inside because I couldn't drink red wine while I was like cooking my pasta, and like listening to a podcast to get me through it. Like that's who I always picture when I'm like, I needed so many of those episodes to get me through so many of those moments. Or like if I was going for a walk just to avoid like going to the liquor store or whatever it was, like those podcasts helped me so much. So making the podcast after going on some myself as a guest and seeing how cool the experience was, I sort of just like dove right into that. And yeah, my goal there is to share, yes, stories of sobriety, but also elevate a lot of the brands and resources that are out there, like we were saying before, because unless you're seeking them out, you may not even realize they're there. So I try to have on a lot of guests in that space. So people who are doing like zero proof events, like I said, alcohol-free brands. I have some, alcohol-free blogs. I'm trying to think of like the people that I have lined up, but trying to elevate those people who can really like provide support for people in recovery. So trying to do like a little twofold goal there, because I think those stories are really, really powerful when you can hear yourself or see yourself in somebody else's story, but then also spread the word about like those tangible products and resources and spaces that people can reach for. Yeah.
I love that. And I think like you're saying, kind of giving back, and becoming a resource, like the ones that you really you use so much and relied on so much for support. That's awesome. It's like a full circle experience.
Yeah, I like to think of it that way. And it's good because it's free, right? Like I've always kind of had, I want to be like careful about how I word this, but like everybody wants to be like a coach or an Instagram like influencer now. And I try and like, I don't want to monetize off of people's struggles. And so I think like making a podcast, I share about a lot of products too on my page because I'll get brands that will send me their like alcohol-free beer as a gift. And then of course, like they would love for me to share it. So I do that. But like, my goal is not to be an influencer by any means or like be like an affiliate for these brands. Like I don't want to do that. I've never wanted to do that. I just want to create stuff that people can reference. Like, again, the same way that I did, and that people can lean on. So like the podcast, it's free. Like I'm not in a place where I'm monetizing it at all right now, like maybe in the future, but like, I love that it's a free resource. And I always say too, like, you don't have to pay hundreds of dollars to get sober. Like there are a lot of coaches and programs that are going to, try and sell you. And like, that's your prerogative to do those, but like, you don't have to do those either. So I try and lift up like affordable and free resources too.
Really is great. Well, Meg, we're kind of nearing the end here, but I do want to ask if if there's anything else that you want people to know about your journey, about your intentions and all the work that you do for everyone else, or just anything else you want people to know about you today.
I think we covered so much. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much. I feel like I just like nonstop word vomit over here. But no, I mean, we covered a lot. We didn't touch too much on like the intersection of disordered eating and disordered alcohol use. But that is something, I guess, like one last thing would be that is something that I try to write about and share about. It can get tricky. I'm still very much like in recovery from my ED and like working on that. And that can be like triggering in its own sense for people. I know for myself, like reading that kind of content can be triggering for me. So hard for me to verbalize, but I do bring that perspective into some of the content that I make, especially when it comes to like clean and healthy alcohol, like, because we see that all the time, and like skinny drinks and kind of how like diet culture is wrapped up in alcohol marketing. And so I think if you're someone listening who can relate to that or can relate to struggling with eating and drinking, where it's like, do you find yourself really overeating when you're drinking? Do you find yourself overeating when you're hungover? Or do you find yourself binging and purging when you're hungover, or starving yourself when you're going to drink? Like, these are just some of the ways that it like overlapped for me, and like counting every calorie, but like not counting alcohol calories. Like there's so many ways they intersected, and like, so that's just another topic that I try to bring to light over there. And I'm going to keep trying to talk about it the further along I get in the podcast. So that's just another thing you might see and find. But yeah, I'm at You Don't Have to Drink. My podcast is More Than Sobriety. And thank you so much for having me. I'm like, this was great. And I really appreciate the time and like the platform that you gave me to share about my story on your platform. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. I'm so glad you shared where our listeners can find you. I know that so many people that I work with professionally in my personal life, like are like on a journey, or at least sober curious or questioning sober curiosity. So I'm so glad to even begin this conversation with you today. And perhaps we can have you back to talk more about that intersection at another point, because I know there's so much there.
Yeah, anytime. And you don't have to be fully sober to like benefit from cutting back. Like, I think it's great that so many people are looking at their habits. Like, if you don't resonate with my story, like, that's all good, but you can still benefit from taking a look at it. So thanks for mentioning that too.
Yeah, of course. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Meg, for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Enjoy your weekend, and thank you again to our listeners. Thank you for following along with us. Thank you for rating, reviewing, subscribing, following us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We really, really appreciate those ratings and reviews. And if this episode was helpful to you, or you know someone who it might be helpful for, share it with a friend. That is super, super helpful for us. Any feedback that you can give to us goes a long way and helps us grow our audience too. You can also check out our YouTube channel, Revive Center for Wellness, where we not only have such great wellness content up there all the time, but we also have episodes of our weekly bonus podcast, Reactivity TV, where we're giving our therapist takes to all things trending, movies and TV. So make sure you're subscribed and checking that out too. You can follow us on Instagram at ReviveCFW. You can follow Catherine at Catherine Van Eyck, me at Amy Albero LCSW. You can check out our website, revivecfw.com, and send us your emails to wishingyouvell@revivecfw.com. But until next time, we are wishing you well.